Good morning everybody. صباح الخير. انتوا هذا هو قدركم بقى ان انا بقى sharing the session وبعلق فيها انا مش عارفه ومحدش قاعد معايا. Anyway, good morning. I hope Amira is with us and Sharir also is with us. I can see them. So I'll give you Shahir and Amira are presenting a paper under the title Household Micro and Small Enterprises in Egypt, Overview, Challenges and the Way Forward. Now you have 20 minutes. Who will start? Amira or Shahir? I don't know. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Before I start presenting our paper, I'd like to thank Ragi Asad, Caroline Kraft, and Irene Silvanus for allowing us to be part of this wonderful effort. I would also like to thank ERF, especially Dr. Ibrahim Al-Badawi and the statistical team under the management of Maya Gadalla, my friend and co-author, for always making sure we have reliable data available for us. Today I'm going to be presenting my joint work with my friend and co-author Shahir Zaki on household micro and small enterprises in Egypt. In order to introduce the micro, small and medium enterprises are said to be the engine of job creation and innovation. They had been disproportionately affected by the series of shocks from COVID-19 to declining oil prices in 2020, Ukraine war, the debt and foreign exchange crisis lately in Egypt. It has been considered, largely considered, that limited access to finance and lack of adequate collateral make up a great obstacle to growth, formality, and survival of small and micro and medium enterprises. In fact, the World Bank estimated that the value of the collateral in Egypt is as high as 158% of the value of the loan. There have been numerous initiatives by the Central Bank of Egypt to improve access to finance, and there have been extensive regulatory and institutional reforms to improve access to finance. And most importantly is the new micro and small and medium enterprise law enacted in 2022. Since 99.7% of all household enterprises in Egypt are micro and small, we use the household enterprise module from the ELMPS in its 5 waves from 1998 to 2023 to track the state of non-farm household micro and small enterprises in Egypt, their location, their age, economic activity, owner characteristics over time. We also look at enterprise closure or failure rates. So because of all the institutional reforms and the initiatives, we will try to track the access to finance over the 5 waves, looking for a structural break or a change in the pattern of lending to micro and small enterprises. We also focus on changes in the informality status of small and micro enterprises in Egypt. The Central Bank of Egypt has undertaken many initiatives. In 2016, 20% of banks' total lending was supposed to be directed to small and medium enterprises. In 2017, it injected 30 billion in the banking system to encourage lending to micro enterprises at just 5% interest rates. It became a 20% shareholder of the credit guarantee company and thereby serving as a trust fund to encourage banks to lend to small and micro enterprises with limited or no collateral. It injected 2 billion toward financial assurance, and in 2018, it allocated even 200 billion to finance 350,000 small and micro enterprises, small and medium enterprises at competitive interest rates. In terms of institutional regulatory reforms, in 2015, the government adopted a business strategy for small and medium enterprise lending. In 2017, it established MENA, the Micro, Small and Medium Enterprise Development Agency, which is the main entity to introduce and implement small and medium enterprise policies. It oversees microcredit programs, and it's in charge of the duties of the Social Fund for Development, the Industrial Training Center, and the Industrial Modernization Center. The government also enacted in the same year the new investment law, which gives a 30% reduction in investment costs in micro and small enterprise. In 2018, the government enacted the leasing and factoring law. Factoring means that invoices are transferred to a factoring company, which gives advance payments to enterprise receivables before the due date. So it basically gives the enterprises the money they are owed by their customers before the due date. Leasing allows enterprises to rent assets, for example, a fridge, from a lessor or the leasing company. In 2018, the government also issued the executive regulation of movable collateral law, which allows banks to accept movable intangible assets and securities as collaterals. So the collateral doesn't have to be your house or your land. It can be a movable asset. On top of all regulatory reforms is the micro, small, and medium enterprise law, which regulates the development of MSMEs and adopts a unified definition of MSMEs, offers tax and non-tax incentives, and for lending institutions, which means it extends the incentive to financial institutions, to incubators, and accelerators that assist small and medium enterprises to grow. The law levies a flat tax rate for 3 years, irrespective of revenue, to encourage SMEs to formalize, and exempt small and medium enterprises from license and land registration fees. Up to 2021, there had been no evidence of increased access to finance, as Aimer and Silwanis have shown. Of course, this would take time. So now, after 2 years, we are trying to track the changes. And Aimer and Silwanis, they said that this is partly to do with the definition used by the Central Bank of Egypt and other funding institutions that target larger enterprises by definition than that employed based on enterprise number of workers. This discrepancy resulted in the exclusion of small enterprises in favor of larger ones from the majority of funding opportunities. Now, how does the sector look like? We say a household is involved in an enterprise if a member reports being self-employed, being an employer who hires others, is an unpaid family worker engaged in production for the market, or reports having a non-farm household enterprise. In 2023, 20% of households reported a non-farm enterprise, which reversed the declining trend observed between 1998 and 2018, when household enterprises declined from 20.4% to 12.45% in 2018. In terms of the economic activities of small and micro enterprises, we noticed that household non-farm enterprises are dominated by wholesale and retail activities. However, in 2023, there had been a sharp drop in its share by 15% compared to 2018, representing now just 38% of all economic activities. There had also been a decline in manufacturing by 4% during the 25 years from 1998 to 2023, consistent with the national trend of deindustrialization that Raghi Asad talked about in yesterday's presentation. The decline in wholesale retail is matched by increase in transportation and storage, in construction, in education and other services. Raghi also mentioned the increase in education, private tutoring, etc., now that public education is receding. We observe a continued limited diversification, with the wholesale and retail sector, transport and manufacturing representing 70% of all activities in 2023, there's a large concentration in economic activity. We also observe a disappointing trend that there's a very limited presence of information communication technologies, professional and scientific technical activities. In fact, just 4% of all household enterprises have a page on the internet, and just 1.5% have a mobile program to sell in 2023. With the implication that there is a lack of sophistication in the household enterprise sector in general. In terms of location and ownership, the most common location of household enterprises is home-based, though declining from 40% in 98 to 30% in 2023. Working from a workshop or a factory has nearly tripled, from 5% to 15% in 23. Street vendors have declined by about 20% in 2023. One can think of it as something positive. However, it could also be an indication of potentially increased police grip on the economy. Most enterprises are solely owned by the household rather than in partnership. In terms of informality, we try to be consistent with the definition used by the team working on the book. So we define formality as being commercially registered. Formality has steadily declined by 15% over the quarter century from 98 to 2023, from 42% to 27%. Informality being counter-cyclical means that as formality declines, informality increased, reaching 74% by 2023. The informal sector is labor-intensive, and its participants' productivity is too low to allow them to operate formally. And like the labor market, the enterprise sector is segmented along formal and informal lines. Household enterprises are increasingly informal as they are forced out of formality on account of barriers to entry to the formal private sector, including political barriers to entry. It is well documented that there are a lot of barriers to entry, that markets are not competitive in many sectors of the Egyptian economy based on political economy considerations to benefit the few privileged, those who are close to power. This finding enforces the traditional dualistic view of the economy, traditional versus the modern sector, the productive versus the unproductive sector, as we've learned in our development class years ago. In terms of correlates to informality, in terms of enterprise characteristics, we see that informality is greater in rural areas, and despite the fact that informality is increasing steadily in both rural and urban areas, it is increasing at a higher rate in urban areas from 71% in 98, from 48% in 98 to 65% in 2023 in urban areas. That's nearly a 37% increase. Informality is also greater the smaller the enterprise size and the younger its age. Informality increased over time in both micro and small enterprises. However, the rate of increase, once again, for small-sized enterprises has been nearly 4 times that of the micro-sized. So between 98 and 2023, informality has increased from 20% to 37% for small-sized enterprises, which is an alarming trend of informalization of even the relatively larger sizes in that sector. In terms of correlates of informality with owner characteristics, we see that informality is more widespread among female household enterprise owners, which is a persistent trend. So by 2023, 90% of all female-owned enterprises were informal. Informality among men owners exhibits also an upward trend from 52% in 1998 to 68% in 2023. Informality occurs most among the less educated enterprise owners and is greater the younger the household enterprise owner is. We tried to look very roughly at enterprise closure rates or failure rates. As you can see from the table to the left, 25% of household enterprises surveyed in 2023 were established during the 5-year period since 2019 and so forth. So looking at enterprise age, we identify a clear pattern of predominance of younger firms, which is not a surprise. From this distribution of surveyed household enterprises by age, we can roughly estimate a mortality or a closure rate. The red line shows a simulation to produce these data, and it gives that a 5-year closure rate between 25 and 31% fits these data quite closely. Caroline Kraft in 2024 has using the panel of the enterprises has rigorously estimated the 5-year closure rate at 32% for the period 98-2006, which is similar to our rough estimate. Why is this important? Because high closure rates are consistent with the stylized facts of market exit in the developed world in that sector. Usually 60% of new entrants would exit within just 5 years of entry. However, what we observe here in the Egyptian household enterprise sector is that these rates are smaller. So the enterprises take longer to close. And it could indicate good news. However, we attribute this observed smaller closure rates to the sector being predominantly a non-dynamic survival sector. In terms of the main sources of finance, or in particular capital finance, what we observe in 2023 is that despite microfinance initiatives, institutional and regulatory reforms, the main sources of household enterprise capital finance remain exclusively based on self-finance, 97%, with savings 67%, inheritance 11%, جمعيات or ROSCAs at 6%, loans from friends and family also 6%, loans from public and private banks and other public institutions such as Social Fund for Development altogether amount to a trivial 2.4% of all capital finance. Loans from NGOs 1%, despite being so small, they still surpass those from private banks, etc. So what are our findings? Our findings are basically that household, non-farm, micro and small enterprises are dominated by informal, male-owned micro enterprises, that the sector exhibits limited diversification and sophistication, and increases in informalization over time, and that despite the initiatives and the reforms, the household, micro and small enterprise sector remains heavily self-financed. Our rough estimates of enterprise closure rates are generally smaller than the international stylized facts, indicating that the household enterprise sector in Egypt is mainly a survival sector with limited employment opportunities and mostly political barriers to entry into the formal private sector. The household, micro and small enterprise sector in Egypt is perhaps the only way to earning a living for many people. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, I would like at the beginning to thank the whole ERF team, Dr. Ragi Asad, certainly for being able to sustain this ELMPS for 5 rounds now. And this is an achievement. We have to applaud you. And certainly the whole team, طبعا كمان Dr. Amira Haddad for this paper and Dr. Shahir Zaki. Having said that, I will go into my comment. This paper tracks the changes in the MSEs. It's entitled Household, Micro and Small Enterprises in Egypt. So take care of the title, Micro and Small Household, Micro and Small Enterprises in Egypt, Overview, Challenges and the Way Forward. So this is the title. The paper tracks the changes in the MSEs over the years of the special rounds of labor force surveys from 1998 till 2023. This means they have the advantages of tracking a huge and vibrant sector over more than 25 years, which gives the researchers an opportunity to dig in depth into the dynamics of the sector over time. So this is, actually to me it was, I liked having to go through time and see all the developments that took place in the sector. The paper refers at the beginning that it will consider the change, especially since a new MSMEs law was issued in 2022, and I have the honor to say that I was one of the 2 people who wrote the law. I mean the part on MSMEs, taxes. Aside from some grammar or language mistakes, I have some remarks on the paper. I have 8 remarks, actually. First remark is, I feel when reading the paper that there is some confusion in terms, between terms in the analysis. Thus, the paper sometimes talks about MSEs, which is micro and small enterprises, which is the title of the paper, and in other times about MSMEs, and in other types about SMEs. So sometimes I felt confused. What are we concentrating on? Even in one of the figures, it refers to a comparison between micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, which is not the main concern of this document. This paper is more concerned of micro and small enterprises. So I would suggest that these terms be revised to be, I'm sure that in some instances when you say MSMEs law, it's correct. It's not a mistake. Sometimes when you talk about SMEs, it's okay, but sometimes there is a confusion. So you have to revise this part and look into it. Number 2, sometimes there is also a confusion in comparing the numbers. Like in page 2, paragraph 1, the paper mentions MSEs account for about 98.7% of non-agricultural economic units in Egypt. No, it's not non-agricultural, it's private non-agricultural units. And then it refers to, says that 94.8% of the employment outside the public sector. And I guess the authors mean private non-agricultural enterprises. So there is some, errors in the terms that has to be revised. Number 3, the paper said at the beginning that it will consider the change, especially that took place since a new MSMEs law was issued in 2020. Now, the law was issued in 2020, and the paper and the survey was conducted in 2023. So I would have imagined that the survey would have included a question on the law to ask the micro and small entrepreneurs, did you hear about the law? Did you benefit of this law? At least 2 minor questions to understand whether the people heard about it, benefited from it or not. So, this is the point number 1 where the MSMEs law is concerned. Number 2, with regards to the law, it's not about, the importance of the law is not about its definition of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. It's what it includes in tax benefits for the micro enterprises. So in some parts of this law, the very small that have less than 250,000 turnover per year, they get to pay only lump sum tax. So I will give you this in the comment when I send it to you, because this is the main essence of the law. They give a special treatment to the micro enterprises that makes life easier to them. So the question is, why didn't it matter? Why didn't the micro and small enterprise law 152 for the year 2020, why didn't it matter? Let me give you the answer to that, because no one heard of it. I mean, no entrepreneurs heard of it, and no tax collectors heard of it. And we did this exercise with them. We asked them, yes, we didn't hear of it. So if the tax collectors didn't hear of it, and the micro and small entrepreneurs didn't hear of the law, so how would it matter? I mean, you have to take that into consideration. Also, there is here a mix between, you are comparing between the definition of MSEs in the study, which is based on the number of workers, and the definition of the law and the Central Bank of Egypt, which is based on turnover or / invested capital. So the definition of the law and Central Bank defines the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in a way that makes them much more bigger than the enterprises that we see in our survey here. So there is no comparison between the two definitions. They are really very wide apart from each other. And my feeling, and I said that many times, that the central bank's definition or the law definition is unrealistic to the situation in Egypt. It is exclusive, not inclusive. It is exclusive of the micro and small, the real micro and small that we know of, and it is only inclusive of the medium-sized enterprises, even those that have number of workers more than 100 workers. So the definition is not realistic in the sense of what we see on ground. And then the paper sort of jumps all at once to refer to finance as the main obstacle encountering MSEs. There is no justification, at least in the Egyptian MSEs, that this is the primary problem. They have other problems. And let me tell you from experience, from sitting with numerous micro and small entrepreneurs, one of the main factors that makes them work informally, let me state, one, the fear of being not profitable. So they start being informal, not because of lack of finance, the fear of being, of losing, the fear of incurring loss, and that's why they start informal. The fear of, they don't like the complexity of the laws, the complexity of registration and so on. Yes, access to finance is an issue. Access to workers who can work and stay in work and be sustainable in their work is a difficulty. So there are so many other important factors that matter besides finance, not only finance, but a lot of other factors. And then it moves to the definition used in informality. The paper mentions that the definition that will be used to denote informality is the commercial license. And it says that the commercial license is the criteria that is being used, mentioned by the law of 2020. This is not correct. The criteria mentioned by the law is having an operation license, and this is different from commercial registration. Commercial registration is done by اتحاد الغرف التجارية, Chamber of Commerce. Operation license is done in a government entity, not a private entity. So this makes the commercial registration not a sufficient criteria to distinguish between formal and informal, to me, and according to law, this is not the criteria to be used in distinguishing between formality and informality. I like the part where the researchers mentioned where they talked about the MSE's failure rate, and they said that in the case of Egypt, the failure rate is relatively low compared to other countries in Europe and so on. I didn't get exactly how they calculated the failure rate, but I just have to ask a question. Maybe it's a naive question. You did, in 2023, did you ask the data collectors to visit all the previous enterprises and see what closed and what didn't close? I mean, did they do that so that they know how many failed, how many were closed down in a period of 5 years? I'm not sure. This is just a clarification question. In the conclusion, the authors mentioned that the MSEs are of little value to the economy. I beg to disagree here. Why? How do you assess this value? How can one assess the value of MSEs? I mean, isn't it providing jobs? Low-income jobs, very low-income jobs, but doesn't it provide jobs, first of all? Doesn't it generate income? Doesn't it offer training in some activities? Doesn't it produce goods and services of low quality to go to poor people who cannot afford more expensive goods and services? I mean, it has a value, or else it wouldn't have existed. But the problem is that we don't have in this kind of survey data on how much is being produced, how much the sales are, and so on, the productivity per worker, the capital labor ratio, the capital productivity. We don't have this kind of, I guess so, we don't have this kind of data in the survey. Finally, I suggest that at the end of this paper, you should add the household enterprise survey questions. The part on the household enterprises should be added to the paper, because we'd like to, when we read the paper, we'd like to see the questions that were part of the survey, the questionnaire. You should, I put an additional comment here, that the researchers should distinguish between the household enterprises inside and outside establishments over time. But I saw that Amira, when she did her presentation, she did put a graph, it was not in the paper, on household within, on enterprises inside establishment and outside establishment, because I thought maybe the trend now was more enterprises outside establishments. So, but she put it in her presentation, which is good, and explaining what's happening is also acceptable. So these are my comments on the paper, but all in all, I didn't go into the details, into the details of, the changes that took place. I can say, finally, that there is increase in households having micro and small enterprises. There is a trend. The paper shows the trend of households that are having micro and small enterprises. The percentage is growing. Secondly, informality is growing. Thirdly, there is a change in economic activities from what I see. Fourthly, formal finance is quite limited, very limited. And most of the enterprises, like 97% of the enterprises, rely on own resources, own finance, rather than any source of formal finance, because those formal finances are really not targeting them. They are forgetting all about them. They target someone else, not in this survey. So thank you very much. I will open now the floor for discussion. If you have like 10 minutes. ممكن 10 minutes. So any questions here? There are comments online. Okay, Dr. Ibrahim also wanted.
Just very briefly to emphasize what you said, Dr. Ali, about informality. It's not just about registration.
Yes.
It's about how the enterprise functions. It could be very well registered, but it functions completely informally. This is a very good point. But I have a question. Was informality only considered in respect of activity, production, or whether it was also in terms of employment? I did not really understand whether this was considered or not.
Yes.
A couple of comments from Dr. Saeed Abbas Ahmed.
Yes.
First one is concessional finance under discrimination leads to more finance gaps. You may need to think of SME within stage of growth model rather than be taken as one unit. This is very common problem in MSME research work. And the second comment is we're looking for ERF support to develop a workable definition of MSME in the region. This is a debatable issue. Thank you.
Okay. And no other questions? Yes, Irene.
I have a clarification question for you, Dr. Alia, because I was curious a little bit to understand further. Can an establishment without an operational license or رقم منشأة have a commercial license from اتحاد الصناعات؟
commercial مش اتحاد الصناعات من اتحاد الغرف التجارية.
اتحاد الغرف التجارية
ممكن
أو
ممكن خطوة.
without an establishment registration number.
They can, yes. Yes. What really matters from the governmental or public view is that you have an operation license. رخصة تشغيل. دي ترخيص التشغيل. This is the starting point. And then the other next point is you can get the commercial registration or the industrial registration from the Egyptian Federation of Industries. But what really matters is license, tax card, having or keeping regular books, regular accounts. These are the three main. Add to that commercial registration or industrial registration according to the type of activity that you're pursuing. So, yes. As to the question of Dr. Ibrahim, how was informality defined? In our case here, the researchers relied on the commercial registration. Okay, if you have the data on the license, and you do, I remember we had all these data. So if you have the data on licenses, this would be more appropriate, because licenses are issued by the government. Commercial registration is issued by the Egyptian اتحاد الغرف التجارية, Chamber of Commerce. This is not governmental. This is more private nature. So license would be better if you have also the tax card data and the keeping records or keeping books. You know, the four criteria that used to use before that, this would be more, if you don't want to use all of them, just use the operation license, because this is mentioned in the law. They should have رخصة ترخيص التشغيل وكل الموافقات الأخرى. ده القانون بيقول كده.
Activities require رخصة تشغيل?
Yes. أنا ما فهمتش السؤال بتاع الدكتور سيد قوي. بس أنا بس بأكد على الدكتور إبراهيم هنا في الحالة دي in this case it's they use a certain criteria for informality. However, informality is as Amira said, is higher in micro enterprises, is higher in maybe in retail activities, you know, trade activity, retail activities. So yani, you can see it higher in certain areas, rural areas, and so on. But the determining factor is the government, the conditions set by the government, not set by us, you know. They say you have to have a license, you have to have a tax card, you have to keep regular accounts. Unless you are extremely small, extremely micro, when the enterprise is extremely micro, like the turnover is less than 250,000 pounds a year, then they don't have to have all this stuff. They have to just pay 1,000 or 2,000 pounds a year, and that's it. Exactly like the taxi driver. The taxi is an enterprise. So what does the taxi driver do? He goes to pay taxes every year when he renews the license of the. So he pays like 500 or 700 pounds. This is the taxes, regardless of how much money he did make from driving the taxi. So the change in the new law is towards facilitating and making a little bit life a little bit easier for micro entrepreneurs, especially micro entrepreneurs, and not requesting a lot of requirements from them if they are extremely small. And this has to be mentioned in the paper, since they mention at the beginning of the paper that they are tracking the changes to see what happened after the new law was introduced. But in general, the paper shows tracks the changes. It tracks the changes in the number of employment. It tracks the changes in economic activities. It tracks a lot of changes, but I feel that some issues have to be reviewed here and changed a bit. Thank you.
Dr. Alia, there are just a couple of, I think Amira wants to have a word, and yeah.
Yeah, please. Go ahead, Amir.
Anyways, thank you so much, Dr. Alia, for your very valid comments, and thank you for everyone else. Dr. Alia, you're absolutely right about micro and small and medium enterprises. I know that the law is made for micro and small and medium enterprise, micro, small and medium enterprises, despite the fact that our enterprises, the household enterprises, are only micro and small. And I think the paper by Irene and Mona Amer has showed very much this problematic that you mentioned about the laws targeting larger size enterprises in their access to finance, so they actually completely miss the micro size. Even the current definition of the law, you still see the definition is not based on the number of workers, instead, as you mentioned, by the turnover rate. However, I mean, we were hoping, we were trying to look if the law had any effect, and like you said, rightfully so, these changes may appear in the next wave of the ELMPS, although I would be very doubtful. And I also wanted to let you know that I didn't mean they are of low value in terms of they're not providing employment or whatever. I meant from perhaps an industrial organization perspective, that they produce low quality goods, that they are not sophisticated, that they don't add value in terms of productivity to the economy, and that they are basically a survival sector that caters for the other poor in the economy. In fact, and the estimate of the closure rates shows this very clearly, that actually they don't close as quickly as enterprises elsewhere around the world because they are a survival sector. They are not a dynamic sector where there is enormous competition. They are a reasonably survival sector. And this is because the opportunities through the formal private sector are limited and there are lots of barriers to entry. And I would have to put the political barriers to entry into many sectors of the economy, into the informal sector on top of my list. There's a lot of research that shows that there are many sectors in Egypt that are protected to benefit the privileged, protected from competition. So the markets are not contestable in the sense that anyone can come into the market and exit the market. No, our markets are rigid, are very rigid in that way.
I just would like, before we close, to thank the whole floor. And I will just mention one point here before I leave you. The informal sector includes some activities that are highly productive in the area of software development, programs development. There are a lot of young people now working from home and doing a lot of good work, earning a lot of money. And this you can see in the educational level of the people working informally. The university graduates are increasing in numbers and in percentages to total population of entrepreneurs, and those are not losing their time. Some of them are doing very good jobs, and I know some of my daughter's friends who are working online and earning a lot of money in US dollars and in euros and so on. So it's not all really of very low value. Thank you very much, and see you in the next session.